Sally Beale loves books as an object and has been known to cradle a paperback like a baby. She earned her BA in art history from Florida State University and her MA in arts administration from the University of New Orleans. Sally is Letterform Archive's membership and corporate giving manager, but loves using her art history background to research new topics in our collections. So without any further ado, please welcome Sally. I'm going to clap for everybody. I'm your ventriloquist for today. Also, if you have questions, please share them in the Q&A box at the bottom, and I will voice them for you.
All right, hi everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here with me today. If you're new to Letterform Archive, welcome. And if you're not, welcome back. Sorry, I just always get this little tingling in the back of my mind, like, you're muted. But I think we both know that I'm not. My name is Sally, just like Sarah said. I'll be guiding you on this journey today. But before we get right on into it, I want to thank Paula Zanol, our collections associate, because without her, I would not have even known where to begin. This salon is going to cover the history and design of the US book jackets. I wanted to cover the book jacket more globally, but unfortunately, while this interest may be considered niche by some, the topic is broad, and I'm sure that you don't have all day to spend with me. So like I said, today I will bring you along on how I became interested in book jackets. I'm going to go over a very, very brief history of how they kind of came to be. We'll cover designers that we have on the online archive, and then I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into our collection of some designers that we haven't quite digitized yet. So just give me a moment to share the screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see this. So my coworkers are absolutely sick and tired of seeing this piece from me. But when I came on board to Letterform Archive in January of 2020, I began to explore the online archive. And this piece immediately stood out to me, and I needed to know more. And the beginning of needing to know more was to look into, who is this designer? Who is Philip Grushkin? And here's what I found. I found that Philip Grushkin does not have a Wikipedia, but he does have a New York Times obituary. And that there is an awesome blog post on letterformarchive.org by our librarian, Kate Long, who is also an amazing resource for me while researching this salon. Grushkin studied at Cooper Union in Manhattan, and then later became the pupil and protege of George Salter, who we will talk about a little bit later. He was very dedicated and adamant about hand lettering, and I want to show you some of the process works that we have in our collection. So here's obviously the final result, and then here is a detail of the banding and all of those beautiful brush strokes. And then here is this lettering, which I will also give you a little zoomed in detail of. And here you can see, excuse me, the notes and these little lines, the correction here. Actually, one of our favorite details in our collection that has to do with Grushkin was his treatment of publishing house logos. He would often rework the logos to match the illustration, which I'm going to say usually people don't want you to mess with their logo, but you can see here that he was really able to retain the recognizable iconic nature of the logo. So for a closer look, this is the Random, this is the Random House logo. And it's obvious, it's not the usual one we see. Another fun fact, Grushkin was not a huge fan of the digital age. He said that computers obliterated all that felt alive. But in the 1990s, Grushkin discovered that no publisher was going to accept a finished book design except for on a computer disk. And so the story goes that in about 6 months, he taught himself how to design books on the computer. And this is right about the point in my research where like a white rabbit ran across my screen saying that he was late, and I was bound to go down the rabbit hole. So how did we get here? Let's go over the design, or not the design, excuse me, the history just a little bit. So before 1820, books were sold unbound for the most part. There was no dust jackets, of course, because there was no binding. Book owners would occasionally fashion their own jackets out of leather or wallpaper. These were specifically for protection. And then some very small popular books like annual gift books or almanacs would be issued in detachable printed pasteboard box sheaths. And some people do loosely consider these to be the first dust jackets, but again, like purely for protection. In the 1820s, binding became more common and began to become more elaborate. These next couple of examples aren't book jackets, but they're just very early bindings, and how they started to become more decorative and elaborate. I want to zoom in on this piece specifically because it's heartbreakingly beautiful with all these tiny little flowers. And then in the 1850s is when we start to see the modern use of the book jacket with flaps. And in the 1880s, it was officially common to have a book jacket, but it was very specifically a dust jacket. Through the 19th century, through the 19th century, and then for the very early 20th century, book jackets were ephemeral. They were discarded after purchasing the book. But the book cover was becoming more and more decorative. And it's important to note that during 1890 or through 1890 to 1920, we're circulating through some interesting art movements like Art Nouveau, Constructivism, and Modernism in general. And a few key things happened that transformed the dust jacket. First, creating elaborate book covers was more expensive, so it was just cheaper for publishers to make the jackets more attractive. Also, there was the rise of consumer culture in the 1910s to 20s, and the jacket became a selling device. Think of it as like attractive packaging. And by the 1920s, most of the artwork and decoration had migrated from the binding to the dust jacket, and jackets were printed with like multiple colors. You could just do more with them. And then we start to see that the printed price of the book moves from the outside of the dust jacket to the inner corner of the dust jacket. And then in 1939, Arthur Brodie, a student at Columbia University, invented a film-based jacket. He just washed the emulsion off some film, folded it around his book for added protection. And so in this short period of time, we go from your dust jacket protecting your book to a film jacket protecting your jacket. And actually this cover right here is an example of how covers were becoming more elaborate. But this cover right here is by the one, the only W.A. Dwiggins, who is the first designer I'd like to share with you today. While looking for works by him for this salon, I came across this article that was written about a pamphlet. Yes, it's an article about a pamphlet that Dwiggins had circulated under the guise of the Society of Calligraphers. And in this pamphlet, which I want to zoom in on this little graphic for you because I think it's just funny and cute. You can see here a chart showing the percentage of excellence in the physical properties of books published since 1910. So Dwiggins had this opinion that the art of the book was in decline. And this was bold and pretty cheeky. And you may be wondering, how could anyone get away with this? And the answer is that he was W.A. Dwiggins. Who is W.A. Dwiggins? That could be a whole separate salon, and we don't have the time, but if you would like to learn more about him outside of what I cover, I know where you can get a book about him. Again, like shop.letterformarchive.org. But to get into his dust jackets, Dwiggins is often credited with coining the term of graphic design, and the man designed everything from the floor to ceiling and also made puppets. In 1923, he was introduced to Alfred A. Knopf, and it was a friendship that kept him pretty busy. While he was living in his Irving Street studio from 1937 to 1956, so just about 20 years, he produced more than 300 book titles. Dwiggins was the master of the layout. I mean, he was a master of everything, but one of the things he was the master of was the layout, which you're going to see here. And he actually went on to write a book about layouts called Layout in Advertising. Here's another great example of layouts with individual boxes, and it's very effective. It's extremely legible. Excuse me. And he was so influential that this book looks like a Dwiggins, but is actually just based on his designs. But it wasn't the only thing that he did. He wasn't afraid to be abstract. And I think that this jacket is extremely effective. It's very sinister. It's interesting how he created the head of a demon, but it's also a building. There's a silhouetted man. It's just much like W.A. Dwiggins, like a little ahead of its time. Dwiggins eventually requested that he be relieved of book jacket duty so he could focus on the interior typography and binding design. So that's where we and Dwiggins part ways for today. But like I said, if you're interested in him, I know a guy who knows a guy where you could get a book. Moving on. This is work by George Salter. George Salter was born in Germany to two musicians, and in World War I, he was a map maker for the German military. Before migrating to New York in 1934, as a secular Jewish refugee, he studied scene painting and had a career working in stage design or theatrical design. Fun fact, actually, both he and his brother Stefan migrated to the US to become book designers, so ran in the family. But you can see, and I mean, especially in this example, Breath of Air, his background working in the theater influenced him to treat his book jackets like miniature mise-en-scenes of a book's theme, with dramatic lighting, stylized angles, and an interesting or unique perspective. And I think also in this piece, you can really see his influence of German Expressionism. And I also just think that it's clever. I mean, we're gonna hit this again and again, but I'm just genuinely a fan of every single jacket you're going to see here today. Again, the drama. With the eye off center, the bold color contrast, this piece is as sinister as it is alluring. And he actually drew inspiration for this jacket off a 1930s perfume ad that he saw in a magazine. This, sorry, every time I see his pieces, I'm just like, they're so effective, but dramatic. While this jacket may look a little bit simpler than his last two, the brush strokes really evoke like waving flag imagery. I think like liberty leading the people, as well as with the slight italic, creates a sense of urgency along with this brush texture that looks like it was done in a hurry. Doesn't this resemble Salter's work? I mean, obviously not exactly, but if you had told me that it was a Salter, I would have believed you before this. But as you can see here, it's not, we've made our way back to Greshkin. It took me no time at all. But Greshkin was Salter's very close pupil and protege. Greshkin even completed one of Salter's final works as he passed away in the midst of completing a design, We have the letters commissioning the work and process pieces in our collection, and I urge you to come visit when you can. And since we've already touched on Grushkin a little bit in the beginning, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time with him, but I do want to show you some of the process pieces that we have in the collection. As you can see here, this is the final for Blue City. And then this would have been the lowlights, and these are the highlights. So all of these little bars, if you imagine them as the white highlights, are the windows in those buildings. I just think it's so cool. Both Grushkin and Salter were involved in the Book Jacket Design Guild that was established in 1947, but it was more commonly known as the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Book Jacket Designers. And that organization very frequently featured Alvin Lustig's work in their exhibits. And here he is. After studying under Frank Lloyd Wright for a little while, Lustig worked for New Directions Publishing House from 1945 to 1955, and he designed their covers for their New Directions New Classics. Lustin, always get his name wrong, always trip up on it. Alvin Lustig's work reflects the contemporary art of his time, the 1940s and 50s. Think Mondrian, think Art Picasso. And I mean, if you look at this mix of texture he's got here, it's so much, but it's not cluttered or busy. You get the point right away. Lustig often worked with biomorphic designs and was another devotee of hand lettering. His work is really a perfect example of modernism being witty or playful, and his work was and is extremely influential. And I wanted to show you this last example because Lustig, just like Dwiggins, just like Grushkin, just like every designer that I'm going to show you here today, was not a one-trick designer. This is a cover with no graphic images, no biomorphic forms, just text. But just text. Who am I kidding? But look at all of these different lettering forms. It's just so effective. And with the color contrast and theory he applied here, chef's kiss. Sadly, he died pretty early on in life due to complications with diabetes. And this is relevant because after her husband's death, Elaine Lustig Cohen began producing work. Alvin Lustig did not approve of her designing while he was alive, but afterwards she took over his New York City design firm and took on the clients and projects that her husband left behind. And then she continued on to have her own illustrious career. While she did go to college and study art and art education, she also gained a lot of skills from being her late husband's right-hand production assistant. But their works are markedly different. She didn't just pick up and start doing what he was doing. Her jackets include more harsh graphic lines and shapes, and an impactful use of what is perceived to be negative space. She really embraced the experimental spirit of the avant-garde while still using the popular simplicity and clarity of the time. And if you'd like to know more about her, there is an excellent article written by Florence Fu on the Letter from Archive blog, if you'd like to check it out. I would be doing you all a huge disservice if I didn't cover and or introduce you to Paul Rand's book jackets. Rand is most well known for logo design and advertising. He created logos and branding for IBM, UPS, Enron, Morningstar, Westinghouse, ABC, I could go on. But his commercial work, especially his work with magazines, translated well to working in book jacket design. Rand was absolutely incredible at giving a tactile sense to a flat printed surface. And I think this is an excellent example of that with his collage, not quite collage. Actually, actually, Stephen Heller, who's the co-founder and co-chair of the MFA Designer as Author program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, says it best, I think. So I'm going to quote him specifically about Paul Rand's book jackets. They are not so much mini posters as small playthings. Perhaps in another life, he would have been a toy maker because he loved the magic of combining shapes, colors, and objects into sculptural cartoons. Suffice to say that I agree that Paul Rand's book jackets stand apart. And that brings us to designers who are in our collection but aren't on the online archive yet, but stay tuned. Some of these designers that I'm going to cover moving forward have limited images because we are not quite 100% unpacked from our recent move. So forgive me, but I hope this provides you with an excellent excuse to come visit us in the future. Just one moment. Oh no. Sorry, well, you got some spoilers there. My bad. So the first artist I want to introduce you to, we're going to be looping back to that Book Jacket Designers Guild that I mentioned before. These are the works of Jean-Yi Wang, who was one of the Book Jacket Designers Guild founders in 1947. And she was also another Salter student. She studied in New York under calligrapher George Salter, and then apprenticed with graphic designer Fritz Kriebel, earning her first illustration job at just 20 years old. Wang was an artist, an illustrator, and a calligrapher. Over a career of 70 years, Wang designed, illustrated, and handwrote over 40 illustrated books, and I cannot stress this enough, and 2,000 dust jackets. Sorry, 2,000 dust jackets for numerous authors, including James Watson, John Updike, Francis Crick. This is all the more impressive when I learned that Wang's hand lettering was so precise that some experienced editors were unable to tell the difference between her lettering and typographic alphabets. Wang was quoted as saying, "Calligraphy is so personal. It reveals a lot about you in addition to just being writing." I wanted to show you this example. There it is. This example. So obviously these are two covers for the same book. But after learning that her hand calligraphy was so precise, I just really like to fantasize that this particular detail she did by hand. Another absolute force in the industry was Louise E. Jefferson. Jefferson's father was a calligrapher for the United States Treasury Department, and he gave her drawing lessons at home, which is very sweet. Then she went on to attend both Howard University and the School of Fine Arts at Hunter College, and she became a founding member of the Harlem Arts Guild in 1935. She did work for Young Women's Christian Association, the NAACP, and the National Urban League, and she was a triple threat. Some of you may have seen her photography, but she was an illustrator, designer, and a photographer. Her freelance work with Friendship Press turned into a full-time position, which led to her directorship in 1942, and she was the first African-American to hold a director position in the publishing industry. In 1960, Jefferson retired from Friendship Press. However, she, of course, continued freelancing. She designed book jackets and maps for universities and publishing companies. After she retired, she traveled to Africa 5 times over a decade. She traveled the continent extensively. She visited over a dozen countries. And her experiences with African culture show in her later designs, but also led her to write a book, The Decorative Arts of Africa, which you can see here. in 1973, and it contains over 300 of her illustrations. Next, we have Susan Foster. Remember when I said that Dwiggins said no more to designing book jackets? Well, that doesn't mean that the books he was designing didn't have jackets. And I would be cruel to show you Susan Foster's jacket and not show you the Dwiggins cover underneath. Foster was a challenging designer to find information on. So a lot of what I know of her comes from her obituary. Basically, this entire salon is brought to you by the obituary sections of the New York Times and Washington Post. Foster attended Carnegie Mellon University and graduated from Cooper Union in New York. She was a multi-talented commercial artist who also designed corporate logos. And I believe that the reason that it was so hard for me to find information about her is that right after she began her book jacket design career, she accompanied her husband, who was a World Bank official, to India and then later East Africa. But what stands out the most to me about her work, come on, computer, there it goes. What stands out the most to me about her work is these, they're not scribbles and they're not quite brush strokes, but like fine lined brush strokes. It stood out the most to me for the works that we have in our collection. And I didn't see much else like it during my research. And I think it's absolutely beautiful. Next up, I wanted to talk to you about Miriam Woods. Miriam Woods was another of Salter's students and another designer that I had a lot of hard time finding information on. But what I did find is that she created book jackets for Harper and Row and other major publishers for over 30 years. And then I dug a little deeper and found that she had done this book jacket for 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. And then I dug a little bit deeper than that and realized that she had done 9 Stories, Franny and Zoe, and Raise High the Roof Beam, which were the last 3 books that he published while alive. And the story seems to be that Salinger worked with Woods to find this distinct and preferred style. And after coming up with a style for 9 Stories, it was the only one he wanted to do. So Miriam just really clicked with him, and you see her work pretty often, you just don't know it's her. My apologies, because I think that I have essentially sped through this out of just pure unadulterated nerves. I think I've been doing the verbal equivalent of speed walking, but this is the last designer I wanted to show to you today. She's another woman who rose to the rank of director. Her name is Audrey Meyer. Meyer studied at the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn before moving to Seattle in 1963, where she began working with the University of Washington Press. Here on my left, and also hopefully your left, is an image of her working as an assistant production manager at the University of Washington Press with then director Don Elgood. Later, Meyer would serve as art director of the press for over 40 years. She only retired in 2007. Her inventive designs were wonderfully rich and colorful. This was a recent acquisition of ours. She was consistently blurring the line between artist and designer. Obviously, in my opinion, if you're a designer, you're an artist, but I understand that the public opinion hasn't always felt that way. This jacket in our collection is extremely effective, in my personal opinion. You understand the book's position far before you read its title. I mean, war, right? What is it good for? And like I said, Audrey Meyer is the last designer that I have for you today. But I'd like to leave you with some food for thought. The artistic and decorative book jacket is just over 100 years old. Where do you think that it's going? My opinion and impression is that cover design is going strong. But what's happening to the book jacket? Do you see them less now that marketing for new releases is largely digital? I mean, because there's something that came up through consumer culture and as a way to sell books. But now we have many, many ways to sell books. And you can read a book on your tablet or your laptop or your computer at home. So do you see them less? Do you see them as much? I'm not saying that they're going anywhere. I'm just saying that now when I shop for new releases in person, I'm keeping an eye out for the book jacket. Yeah, that is all that I have for you today. If you have questions, I would love to answer them for you. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sally. This was such an interesting talk, and so many people are just like raving about how wonderful your style, your presenting style is absolutely really fabulous. So we do have a couple of questions for you, and I'm just going to read. So Laura, which I think is Law, asks, did these early designers do the illustrations themselves, or did they work with artists?
Everyone that I covered today did the illustrations themselves. So actually, I'm so glad that you asked that question. I should have mentioned that up top. Like, most of these book jackets are like soups to nuts, the entire designer. The majority of them, they did the whole thing. So it's not a separate illustrator. It's these amazing artists and designers just being able to do everything.
And Nicole Holmes says, I was just typing this as you began to speak of it. How do you feel about the belief that book design is dead due to online sales of books now and needing to look good for Amazon thumbnails?
Well, I don't think that book design is dead. Hopefully that's like pretty obvious. Especially when it comes to, I hate to call them like coffee table books, but like large books that we put on display that are hardcover. I've seen some truly beautiful printings like right on the hardcover for those. And then also, I've brought this up. No, I haven't brought this up before. I don't know why I started it off like that. But I think paperback design is also on the rise. Oh shoot, I'm not 100% sure the publishing house that did Jeff Vandermeer's paperbacks, but they are the most beautiful paperbacks that I've ever seen. The inside is foil. Yeah, so but that being said, there's an edition now, obviously. The book cover needs to also translate to an icon on Amazon and work on the Instagram grid and on Twitter and things like that. So it's definitely going to change the trajectory of design.
Do you think that I mean, I'm curious actually, as you were looking through this, if you found like Easter eggs or something that was really fun on these materials in person that you think would get lost, like some of the works that you showed us that would get lost if they were translated to an Amazon thumbnail?
Yeah, I do actually. Well, that first example that, sorry, Google Slides like does not want to like keep hitting escape, and it's like, no.
Yeah.
But that first example that I showed of actually, I guess it was the second example of Salter's work of the reworked icon that he did for Random House. I don't think that would have translated onto an icon. Essentially, like the older jackets are just so very like detailed that I think a lot of it would be lost. You'd have to pinch and zoom. And I don't know anyone who's doing that. Like when I shop for books, even if I think that the design is absolutely beautiful, I'm not like zooming in on the icon to see what it's like.
Absolutely. Yeah, I haven't done that myself, and I'm not sure that Amazon even would support like real depth zooming. JP Panter asks, Sally, can you talk about some of the books that didn't make it into the slide presentation today?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. We have a ridiculously extensive collection of check book covers that did not make it into the talk today. For a myriad of reasons, but one of them is because I do not speak the language and I was having a hard time translating it, and I was worried that I would not credit the artist correctly. But that being said, can members see the check covers? Let's see.
That Salon isn't recorded to my knowledge, is it?
I don't think so.
I think one of the early ones.
Yeah,
I'll double check that while you talk a bit more about the check things. I'll look into it.
they're just very beautiful. Part of me is wondering, I'm like, here we go. Is this darn. Okay, I was trying to see if maybe we had any on the online archive, but just like a quick cursory glance, I didn't see any. But that doesn't mean they're not there. It just means that I couldn't find it in time. I did take like a couple of images for them and I did like put them into the slides, but I just was like not confident enough to present them to you today. And then there were a few of the artists that I showed you that didn't make it in today. Just extra Rand, especially extra Lustig, Alvin Lustig. He just made so many book jackets that again, it could have been its own separate salon.
Awesome, thank you. We've got, I think, let's see. Stephen Coles has posted a link to an item in the Letterform archive, online archive, but I am not. Check covers, one of the Taiga covers. All right. One comment that I think is helpful to voice out loud was the can't get flash printing, emboss, and deboss effects on Amazon. Absolutely true. That texture that came through some of those images today was really magical.
And I mean, huge shout out to our digitization librarian, April. She's an absolute star. Without this, I would be so up creek without a paddle.
Yeah. April's are fabulous. Fabulous photographer of all of the work that you saw today on the online archive. And she too has a blog post that talks about that process. Right. So does anyone else have any questions or last comments or things that were particular favorites from you, Sally, that you wanted to go back to?
No, but now I am feeling like maybe a part 2 is like impending. So
yeah. I'm curious about, so you covered a lot of designers today that you said you found most of their information from obituaries, and we did have actually one question from someone that was if somebody had been working on the bio. Oh yeah, is anybody working on the bio of Elaine Lustig Cohen?
I think that maybe Elaine worked on her own bio. I think there's like an ElaineLustigCohen.com. It's like a whole website that's just dedicated to her work. And I think that she has, well, I hate to say it, but she has a Wikipedia. So
Hmm.
unless they mean like, is anyone working on like the book biography of Elaine Lustig Cohen, in which case I am right now working on that. Not sincerely, sorry, but like just, I love her. She's my girl.
Yes, absolutely. I have one question, which was for those authors that, or the designers that you found most of their information in obituaries, which is all too common a problem for many women working in the field, many people of color working in the field, in all fields, really. Um, how did you find out about their work? Was it Google? Was it just poking around the shelves? Word of mouth?
Um, it's like, I mean, a little of all. So I asked our staff, um, I can't, I feel like every like 3 seconds I'm just like shouting out a staff member, but I asked our staff, and almost everyone had someone that they wanted me to know about. And then I looked around the collection just to be sure, but like I said, we're not like 100% unpacked yet, and I'm not interested in messing up the process of unpacking a collection. And then it was just some very, very in-depth Google searches with like a lot of quotation marks around their names.
Mhm.
Um, that photo that I sent, or not sent, excuse me, the photo that I included of Audrey Meyer, for example, it's on like the University of Washington Press blog, but when you just Google Audrey Meyer, like it doesn't come up at all. You have to be, like Google like Audrey Meyer and then like book jackets. So
Mhm.
it's just like anything that mentioned their name whatsoever in the right time period, I just like scoured it out like a drug sniffing dog, honestly.
Amazing. Thank you. I much appreciate it. I would actually love, just purely for the sake of researchability later, to put your list of some of these folks on the description for this page, because I think that uh, folks will want to be doing their own research on this.
I will organize and compile a list of links that everyone can use.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, it looks like there's like some activity here in the chat about, let's see, Catherine Small Galler did a chapbook of someone's covers, but I'm having trouble locating who.
That was Audrey Meyer also, and it's in their quarterly. I just couldn't get my hands on it fast enough to include it in the salon. I was like, I will order a physical copy of this to get more information about her. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you all the attendees. We would love to see you in some of our future events, and it's been a treat. Thanks again, Sally.
Thanks everyone for attending. Have a great rest of your day. And if you'd like to become a member, it's me you'd be talking to. So if you want more of me,